record now. This is so that it can be played back and anyone can review the webinar or the webinet rather at any time after the session. So what to do when selectors change? It's going to be a really great topic today. This is a 20-minute session, kind of just a short, sharp delivery of how Virtuoso can add value in this space, which we'll be speaking to. My name is James Bent, so I'm Head of Sales Engineering at Virtuoso. And as marketing like to say, I'm a simple person who keeps things simple even when talking about the most technical of topics. So let's see if I can hold true to that today. So what's our agenda? Right, so we're going to give you a bit of an introduction to Virtuoso and then just give a bit of a background to element selectors. I'm sure there are some people on the webinar or watching this who of course already know what selectors are and why they change. Some may be familiar with them, others, you might say, well, I'm new to selectors. So we'll just take a minute to set the scene before we get into the interesting piece, which will be, of course, running the demo of how Virtuoso adds value, of what to do when selectors change. So let's get straight into it. So first thing, Virtuoso. For those of you who haven't been introduced to us yet, so Virtuoso is a SaaS platform that delivers test hyperautomation, focusing on anybody being able to create automated tests for functional end-to-end and integration tests of web applications codelessly. It's easy to use, it's steadfast, and it does indeed allow you to release higher quality software faster. So amazing value. But then on today, so element selectors. So we're going to be talking about what happens when these change. But first of all, what are element selectors? So element selectors, which again, some people may know this already, but others who have maybe just sort of heard the terms, an element selector such as an XPath, an ID, a class name, or a label are used to uniquely identify elements in a web page. And they're typically used so that web pages can correctly render elements, could be in the correct position, with the correct styling, but also to find them in the correct structure within the HTML or the DOM. And really for what we're here to talk about today is they're used by automation platforms, such as automated testing platforms, to correctly identify elements to interact with. So they're really important to identify elements so that we can run things like automated testing. But they change. Element selectors can change. Why? So, there are quite a number of reasons, but one of the most common is because IDs, or it could be classes, can change because they are dynamic web elements. They could be database elements where the values are refreshed every time the database is updated. So the class names and IDs can literally change, whether it's on each release, each refresh, or in some cases, every time you reload the page. So anyone who's tested in Salesforce will know this. You get very dynamic applications. It could also be content changing. So for instance, localization of a web application. So labels could change, for example, from English to Spanish. But the one we're going to really focus on today is looking at what happens when you get dynamic web elements, which change could be every time you load or on each release. So element selector changes. Well, what do they mean for automation? People have heard of flaky tests. Well, if your automation relies on those selectors, for instance, the ID or the XPath, but if those go ahead and dynamically change, then they typically break your automation. The result being flaky tests, where flaky tests require manual intervention to then maintain those tests. So literally you might have to go in and identify and update the IDs before you can run the tests again. Where if you're having to spend time manually maintaining tests, then leaving aside the fact you can't run your tests, you're spending time and money fixing those, which in most cases, nobody really desires to have to do that. So the wonderful thing, and what we're really going to get into now, is that you don't have to worry about element selector changes with Virtuoso. You don't have to spend time maintaining them because of dynamic changes. And here's how, as we jump into the demo. Okay, so let me jump in to the Virtuoso platform here. Now, with Virtuoso, so firstly, we are a codeless test automation platform, which literally means that you can write tests in plain English. So you don't need to write with XPath or IDs. You don't need to know code. You can literally, if you can know the flows of the application, and you can use syntax such as write tote bags in search or click on the button based on the label, you can write automated tests. What this also means is that you can actually leverage by writing tests that could be before development has begun, maybe from BDD requirements, could be from wireframes, could be from designs. You can basically go through and write your tests directly from those requirements in plain English, such that as soon as you have finished your code, you can immediately run the tests. Now that's fantastic. And in terms of how do we actually do that? So in terms of making this work as automation, as we execute the tests, which I'm going to run this test now, so you can see what we're doing to convert this codeless test into running automation. Bearing in mind, you could also plug Virtuoso into pipelines or run execution plans. We're launching bots that will hit the website, basically load a headless browser, and will start inspecting at the DOM level. And this is really important in terms of understanding what's happening to ensure, firstly, how do we identify the object in the first place, or the element? And then we'll talk about what we do to ensure that you don't have to worry if those change. So firstly, because we are launching a browser and effectively hitting the website from the front end, we're capturing screenshots for the before and after interactions. But we're also looking at the DOM level to discover all of the current element selectors. So whether that's your XPath, IDs, class names, basically we have all of those elements available, captured for every single step. So we're building based on just a hint of what we see on screen. So for instance, if I want to click on blank exploration, it will then discover that in the DOM and populate the selectors. And that's really important for what we're going to talk about next in the case that those then change. Now, what I also want to highlight is this capability that we have, which is live authoring, which is basically as you write test steps, then the test executes. So you can see it basically running. If we switch over here, so I can see the test and all the steps that I write being executed. Now, what this means, this is really great because it enables you to be able to ensure that you can come in and firstly write executable test steps. But then what you can also do is ensure that when you finish the test, it's immediately executable and that it runs. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just write a step in here to sort of show you how that works. So for instance, if I put, in fact, I want to write this credit card number, and it's a dummy credit card number, so you won't be able to use it, unfortunately. I'm going to write that in the card number box. And the reason for doing that, so you can see that will then populate immediately, so it executes. I could come in and do the CSV as well. So let's put in write 837 in, and I'm going to put in XXX, which is a typo. So I've actually done that incorrectly, but I can easily fix and click here, and that updates correctly to execute. Now, the thing here is that I know that within this website, there are dynamic elements. And for that, what we know is that that's actually this card number here. So when I execute this, basically it's going to run, it's going to identify the elements in the first case, and then it's going to populate those selectors, as we've already seen. But then within this application, what I know is that if I were to run this again and again, and I know that when we do releases, this is our internal testing side, our rocket shop, I know that this credit card field tends to have changes occurring to it. And what that means is that as we execute, if we didn't do anything to be able to ensure that we took care of the changes, such as the changing IDs or the XPaths, this might end up being a flaky test because literally the XPaths or the IDs are changing. If we just relied on those, the test would fail. What we're actually doing though is saying every time we execute the test for every single step, Virtuoso is looking at the previous model of the element as it gets to this step. And then it will basically look and say, if there are changes, we're using algorithms to determine if actually it's the same element, but the selectors now have changed and been updated. And if they are, if we determine that, which we do in about 93% of cases for all different types of changes, then we self-heal that as the test is running for every single execution. So what this is saying is that even if you've got dynamic XPaths or someone's changed the IDs or the class names, it could be the label changing, then we automatically heal that as the test is running. So basically, your maintenance time is reduced to practically zero. You wouldn't have flaky tests because of, let's say, dynamic IDs, for example. To show you another example of that, I'm going to show you SAP for HANA, or S4HANA rather. And this is sort of indicative about the way that because we focused on browser-based applications, we can not only test front-end websites and deal with dynamic frameworks or dynamic IDs, but also business systems. So in this case, we're testing in SAP S4HANA. Equally, we work well with Salesforce, ServiceNow, Workday, and so on. Well, we know that these types of platforms also can be very dynamic. I mean, Salesforce is another great example where literally fields every time you load the page can have a dynamic ID. Again, if you're writing automation using a framework that relies on IDs or maybe XPath, you'll tend to see lots of flaky tests. So for our business system, we do exactly the same thing. You can write tests in plain English. You've got a whole range of different interactions, including be able to do things like store dynamic data, put assertions. You can make API calls in your tests, all in plain English. So I can still test my business system in codeless automation. And again, when this is executed, again, we capture the screenshots for each of the interactions. And again, we look into the DOM level to populate all the available selectors. So again, this has got really good element discovery. And that's even if there are multiples of the same element on the screen. You could do a command such as it could be look for, in this case, sales order type, and then I could interact with the search button closest, even though there are multiple search buttons on the screen. So it works very well, even in that case. But what this means as well is because we are discovering the element selectors for each of those elements, when we rerun this test, even if there are dynamic elements, which I know, again, this particular element here, this mouse click on the CCFU, this is dynamic. Literally, as I execute this, which I'll do, what we're going to see if I go to the actual watch the execution occurring, and you can see here actually the speed of this, it's running the test in real time. What we're going to see is it comes down to this step, the CCFU. This is a dynamic element. It's assigned a dynamic ID or XPath changes every time the test runs. So we're going to see how that doesn't cause the test to fail. It's going to keep on going. We can see it's running the test, it's passing the steps, and this is where it's changing screen or loading up a modal. So we can see it's still running. So again, it demonstrates that we're executing this in real time, which you could be doing in parallel as well. And again, what we're doing here, again, when we're looking at each of the elements, we're looking at the previous model and then comparing to the current and using algorithms. We basically heal those steps as the test is running. So we can see it's identified this step. And when the test finishes, we can see all the self-healing that's occurred by these little sticking plasters. So if I click on that and look into the healing, we can see that we have the previous selectors that were discovered when the test was first run. And now with the dynamic changes, it's basically healing to say it's still identified the correct element. So we can see that based on the steps passed, the screenshot that's been captured. And then basically in the background, we can see that the previous selectors have been removed and the current ones have been added. And that's basically using algorithms to determine with a confidence level that those changes are correct. We run large testing projects, whether it's on an SAP S4HANA, Salesforce, a ServiceNow, lots of front-end websites with our customers. And based on the insights and being able to see how the tests are running, that's how we can determine that algorithms are working incredibly well. And the great thing is that these sort of changes effectively mean, this mechanism means that, based on the Webinet theme in terms of what to do when selectors change, with Virtuoso, the answer is you don't really have to do anything because the platform is taking care of those in virtually all of the common cases. So whether that's a dynamic ID, whether someone's updated the XPath by moving the location of an element, whether the classes have been updated, or even it could be the labels being changed. In virtually all common cases, Virtuoso deals with the self-healing, which means you can just keep the test running again and again with the reduction of the burden of maintenance. So just coming back to looking at our presentation, just in terms of what we're covering, bearing in mind this is one of our new Webinet formats, so it's a short, sharp delivery of on-point content. Basically, if we just think back into the sort of intro, which was what to do when selectors change, the answer is that, again, you simply don't have to worry in the majority of cases to be able to do anything because of the way Virtuoso discovers all of the element structure, so populating all of the element selectors available in the DOM, and then using self-healing to be able to resolve any changes that occur within those. So to that end, just to see now if there are any questions or answers. So I do see there are a couple of questions, which are number one, so is it just limited to ID or XPath changes? Which is, yeah, a great question. We actually get asked this quite a common time because, of course, we know XPaths and IDs are incredibly they're two of the most popular selectors to use in automation. So we're not just trying to fix the issue of an XPath or an ID changing. Self-healing works across any of the element changes in the model. So again, this could be a class name changing. This could be the label on screen changing. It could be the XPath and ID. So it's pretty much anything in the model of the elements can be self-healed. So it's really robust from that perspective. And looks like we have another one here, which is, yeah, does it really work? Yeah, the answer is it does. And actually the wonderful thing here is that we're not just, of course, here to tell you that it works and that any engagement we have, if you really like the look of this and think it's actually something you would like to use, but you would like the proof that both it works and that adds value, then of course you can test it on your application to see if there are certain dynamic changes that you want to see, are they self-healed correctly? You can basically test that on your application. So yeah, we'll be really pleased to do that. Okay, and looks like there is one more question, which is my web app is really dynamic. Can it work with it? Well, I mean, look, we would have to obviously understand, a little bit more information than that. But yeah, I mean, we work with incredibly dynamic applications, which can be ranging from things like Salesforce, where you've got dynamic IDs, but also things like think about changing content. So business system testing where content's changing, data's changing, and therefore a record I might have clicked on yesterday is no longer available. Then actually that could be a good case for saying you're actually utilizing the location of an element rather than the label to be able to identify it and use the self-healing in that case, together with the ID changes. So bottom line again is, rather than me try and say yes to everything, if you're interested, but just think, is that going to work on my app? Get in touch and we'll be more than happy to run a session with you, including talking about, if it's of interest, doing a proof of value, including how self-healing works on your application. Otherwise, I think that looks like all the questions. So hope that's been really valuable to everybody. And for those of you watching afterwards, hello as well. And I hope you, if you want to get in touch, please do so. To get in touch, so virtuoso.qa, you'll find our contact details, the ability to get in touch. We like to have nice conversations. We don't do hard selling. So just get in touch, happy to have a conversation. And yeah, let's show you how Virtuoso can add value in terms of your testing, including dealing with it when element selectors change. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody. Been a pleasure, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Thank you all. Bye-bye now.